Breaking the silence, emotional suppression, and professional men and conflict. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas. Welcome back to the LMI podcast, where we talk about law and conflict resolution topics to educate professionals and everyday people. With me today, I have a special guest, and that is Dr. Bernadette Atanga. Dr. Bernadette Atanga, how are you doing today?
Fine, thank you, and wonderful being here with you, Mac.
Yes, no, thank you for coming on. Thank you for joining me. We both have something similar about ourselves. We were both recently on the podcast with David Webb talking about men and conflict and men's health. And so this is kind of a fortuitous occasion where we're now, connecting with each other on this podcast to talk about a similar topic. But I've been on his podcast before, and that was a lot of fun to talk about men and empowering them in their lives, especially in the context of divorce. But today, you're here to continue the conversation with me, but with a focus more towards professionals. And I would say people who listen to this, a lot of them are lawyers who are professionals, and people in your community are doctors who are professionals. And so we're going to have a great conversation to talk about stress, conflict management. How do we make sure that we live best lives and not take all the negatives into our personal lives and end up hurting ourselves and people we love? But before we get there, let's talk about you a little bit. So can you share a little bit about yourself? I know that you're from Cameroon originally, that you're a doctor of over 30 years, um, internal medicine, I believe. And so you have a lot of background and knowledge, but I wanted you to just share about yourself so for the audience.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I was born in Cameroon. I went to medical school in Italy, where I spent 12 years. And then I moved to the United States, where I did my residency and have worked for, I think, since 1996. I have been a physician for over 30 years, 25 of which was here in the United States. And you mentioned, yes, we were on that podcast. A lot of the work that I do, you mentioned I'm an internist, but also a pediatrician. So I specialized, I had two specialties. And I think it really helped inform the work that I am doing because in medical school, that's where I got introduced just by chance. I took an elective called psychosomatic diseases. And I was fascinated by how a lot of our physical ailments are actually connected to our mental health. And when I look back in Cameroon, where I came from, mental health was not really something that was talked about. People didn't even know about that. And even in extreme cases. So when we talked of mental health, this was the person who was maybe really schizophrenic, bipolar, living on the street. Then we know that is crazy. But
Yeah.
we didn't understand things like just subtle depression, anxiety, things that could affect your blood pressure, affect your GI tract and things like that. So I started that work going back home as part of my own contribution to my community of birth and bringing mental health awareness, leadership, brought that into leadership because I saw how even well-meaning leaders were acting in ways that were not either in their best interest of their family or at work, but at the bottom of it was actually emotional problems. And so I started focusing on men's groups because when I would do town halls and conferences, men would be the ones coming and talking to me as well as some women. And so I realized that we have done a great job with women and children in terms of empowering women, in terms of giving children a voice. But I think men are also a vulnerable population that has been neglected and have been left to fend for themselves. And not only that, internationally, world culture has done a disservice to men in how we have taught them to manage their emotions by just shutting it down. And so, as a kid, even like a 4 or 5 year old boy, you hurt and you want to cry, they'll be like, no, boys don't cry. I think almost every man has heard that boys don't cry, or they say, oh, that's, girls, they make fun of you. And so men learn early on to suppress their emotions. And I think emotional suppression has come with a cost, not only to the men, but also to society, to the rest of us who are in their lives, who work with them. And I think it is time for us to start talking about that and how we help them. Today, we are talking about professional men,
Yeah.
and I think it's because uh, more than 90% of our world is led by men, whether it's on the home front or at the work front. So I think it is really important. The book that I wrote, it applies to everybody, but I actually entitled it for men because I think it serves us all if we attend to men's emotional health and they become better leaders.
Yeah, and so you referenced the book. The book is coming soon. It is titled Beneath the Armor: Practical Strategies for Men to Embrace Vulnerability and Lead with Authentic Strength. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book and when it's due?
Yes. So it's coming out any day now, so soon. And beneath the armor, it's just self explanatory because we have trained men to go around with a shield of armor. So it's like you look at them, they have to portray themselves as strong every time. But if you think about it, you cannot go through life and be strong and every minute of your life because things do happen. Whether it's a death in the family, losing a parent, losing a child, losing a job, heartbreak, what things happen, and there are those moments that we need to feel the pain. I mentioned I was a pediatrician, and a lot of things we don't talk about is childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So in this generation, we have learned to have people open up or talk about trauma and provide healing. But for generations, childhood trauma is just put under the rug. And so people just grow with that pain, never addressed, but it comes out in different ways. For some people, it's drug addiction. For some people, it's alcoholism. For some people, it's workaholism. And the reason I talk about workaholism is because when you're professional and you work very hard, you may even get promoted. You get applause for being such a hard worker, but nobody is paying attention that you may just be crying for help and that your workaholism may not be any different from the drug addiction that somebody else has chosen if it is not serving you. So there is nothing wrong with being a hard worker, but if it doesn't lead to a balanced life and a happy life, then we may need to visit that. And so, yes, well, we talk about men as leaders, but you cannot be an effective leader if you have not taken care of what is underneath the armor, if there is any. And by doing that work, so it's not a therapy book, but it's just an awareness book to make you realize by doing the work, you actually become stronger. And why do I say embracing vulnerability? That's a word that has been attached to some negative connotation like weakness, which of course is not true. A man who is in touch with his feelings is actually a sign of strength. And just a lot of times, even in my practice, when a man talks about maybe some emotional problem and maybe spontaneously, naturally sheds a tear, the first thing they say is, oh, I'm sorry. You cannot be sorry for being human. And that's because we have taught people that. So I think it is strength for people to embrace that emotion. That is the only way they can heal it. And then they become more effective leaders because you feel stronger as a leader because you will be talking from a place of strength, authentic strength, not false strength or false armor.
All good points. So when we talk about, you know, workaholism and the need to just work, it seems like a reason it's similar to alcoholism and other kinds of, negatives that it manifests other people's lives is it can be traced back to trauma in a childhood and it manifests itself later on. So when you're a lawyer, for example, like me, and we are trained from law school to just work really hard and win at all costs, win, and fight for our clients, how do we or how are we to get that kind of balance you're talking about? because I don't think none of us, were trained to know how to actually do this, right?
Most definitely. And that's why I actually wrote the book, because I think it's a manual even for students, university students, to go through before they get out into the workforce so that they can plan their lives accordingly. When we talk of trauma, it's not just childhood trauma, it's not just what happened at the home. I always tell people we live in our homes, we live in society. So you can have the best parents, they did the best for you, but society might actually provide that. You just talked about that, how you train in school. I mean, if you take a lawyer, because we gave that example, you're supposed to be logical, you're supposed to be unemotional, you're supposed to be detached to win, and you're trained to win. And anything short of that is failure. So that affects you emotionally when things don't go as planned, or if you cannot. And then the other thing, if you have a relationship, so if we talk about just lawyers in this case, but any other profession that requires a lot of dedication to your job, whether other high stress jobs, sometimes physicians or firefighters, these are jobs that come with a lot of stress,
Yeah.
and statistically also with a lot of mental health problems. And if you look at the numbers, the rate of suicide in these groups are very high, which means that as noble as these jobs are, we are not taught to manage the stress or what comes with it. There is also trauma from the job, especially first responders, that people don't talk about. So, but nobody trains you how to handle that trauma, how to heal from it, and not to let it spill over into your relationship. The other thing with lawyers, for example, is you have that fighting spirit. You are taught to fight, to
Yeah.
win. But then people don't set boundaries where you check out from work and you leave that at work. And then when you get home, you're a father, you're a husband, a loving father, a loving husband. Sometimes people forget that that is the persona that you need for your job, but it's not a good persona as a husband or as a father. And unfortunately, we are not taught that, or community or society doesn't teach men that, or women as well, because we all, now that we've been allowed into those spaces, and as women, we're actually taught to take on the male persona, to fight like a man, which I don't think should be the case. There are ways that we can express ourselves in a healthy way without trying to portray the strength of a man. But in any case, you take that work persona to the house, it is bound to cause conflict. And that is why we see a high divorce rate in our society today amongst professionals. And that doesn't have to be, because we can prevent it. If we're equipped with the information and we're empowered, we can prevent that. You can be a professional, successful one, and also be a successful husband and father.
Well, can you give us then some tips? So your thing is all about prevention, right? Much like obesity, or much like any kind of disease that might manifest itself in your life later on. If you can do some basics from the beginning, years before, and I think if you can become self-aware, you use the word awareness earlier, just to admit, hey, I see what's going on. Your eyes are open. Can you give us some tips on how somebody, in my profession especially, might be able to balance things out?
So, first of all, what we have to admit is how we feel. So, and this is just general information for everybody. So, for your listeners, so this is not therapy by any means. You cannot have that in general conversation, but
Yeah.
it's just general awareness. And I hope that readers or our listeners take this and then now take the steps. Like even in the book, I have resources for people to actually go get authentic help. But what you need to do is acknowledge where you are. So, because you would not know where you're going to if you don't know where your starting point is.
Correct.
Am I starting from a healthy point? So some of us may have trauma and don't even know we had trauma. Some of us may have, you may just know you're angry, you're anxious, you don't know why, but at least acknowledge that. Secondly, you can also, because when you acknowledge that, then you can start getting the help that you need. If understand, embrace conflict. We are in life, you are going to have conflict. It is not a bad word. It is just the fact of life. You would have conflict even with yourself. So the first conflict is an internal conflict where you're thinking, okay, I have developed this work persona and I don't know how to switch it off when I get home. Or because of my job, I am so stressed, I'm so irritable that when I get home, my kids just annoy me, my spouse annoys me, and all of that. So if you acknowledge that yourself before somebody reminds you or start calling you names that only makes matters worse for you, then that is helpful. So the first thing is the truth and acknowledgement, and then understand how is that playing out. Who am I having conflict with? Is it in my personal life? Is it with my parents? Is it with my spouse? Is it with my children? Is it with my client? Because another thing that most often when you have clients, they come for you because they want you to win. And one of the things, I don't know whether lawyers know this, the rest of us who are not lawyers, and I would say lay people, irrespective of our profession, we have a misunderstanding of what justice is, on
Yeah.
justice in the courtroom. So if you are a professional lawyer, for example, and you don't have, the tools of being patient and emotional intelligence to be in touch with your client's feelings and what they actually want, you may have conflict with that person because they come thinking the courtroom is a truth-seeking institution. This is where the truth comes out, and this is where the facts are all accepted. And then they find out, no, it's a strategy session. There are rules to the game. Not every fact is admissible in court. And so if you didn't prepare them ahead of time, you are going to end up with conflict with that person. And then before you know, they write very bad reviews about you and things like that. So I think so just understanding those predictable situations, which again a lot of people are not taught, and I see that even at family level. When you marry, that's another thing. We marry, sometimes people marry because they've got two careers that can bring in good income and that can give them a good life, but you forget about your personal history, where you're coming from. And a lot of times, your background may actually present sources of conflict. Now, does that mean you shouldn't go ahead and get married? No, it means that that is a predictable source of conflict if you have some cultural differences. And if you address that ahead of time and how you're going to handle that when those situations come up, then you're empowered and you're more equipped to handle the conflict when it shows up and prevent it from becoming a crisis.
So there's so many tangents we could go off of. When I think about what you just said about lawyers having conflict with their clients, this one happens quite a bit, right? Where clients have an expectation. Their case is the most important thing in the world to them, okay? And they want to make sure they have a good result. Lawyers, on the other hand, might see it as one of the projects on their list of to-dos, and they know the rules of court, and know the rules of evidence and procedure. Take it to court, knowing that you might win, you might lose. But oftentimes, we attorneys don't manage our clients' expectations. We let clients believe things or ideas they might get from Google, might get from their friend of a friend of a friend. Um, and it's partly our fault for not kind of guiding them down, the right path, where we're 5 steps ahead, letting them know, hey, listen, this is sometimes what might happen, and uh, but the reason I'm bringing this up is it's a point of conflict that happens in addition to conflict in our personal lives with our spouses and children. Um, do you think that doctors have something similar when it comes to these kind of expectations not being met?
Oh, most definitely, all the time. And I think part of that is also pop culture because, thanks to Law and Order, Grey's Anatomy, people have a different
Yeah, the
expectation
expectations
of
are
how
skewed.
medicine runs or how the courtroom runs, right? In a 1 hour drama, which actually 40 minutes because you have commercials in there, the
Correct.
case is, from the beginning to end and all the facts and everything, and it comes. So that's people come to you. That's what they expect the courtroom is going to look like. It's Law and Order. Or they come to you as a physician, it's Grey's Anatomy. Your doctor meets you at the ER. It's the same doctor that takes you to surgery. It's the same doctor that's at your bedside when you. So people complain these days they don't see their doctor because one time you may see the doctor, the next time you may see a nurse practitioner. It's a team. You have a team of people taking care of you, but TV shows, ER, Grey's Anatomy, and many others have people thinking differently. So yes, but we have to realize that's the culture we live in. And
Yep.
so is the patient wrong? No, they just come with a reality that is not real, but it's part of their reality and we have to acknowledge that. And then again, like you say, you mentioned Google. We have patients come to us with information, which I think is a good thing because sometimes it's helpful. But again, how we help them consume that information on the internet as to how it applies to them individually is what we have to take ownership and make that part of the service that we provide to our patients or our clients. And
Yep.
that's ultimately going to help reduce that conflict. I just think it's empowering people with knowledge. And sometimes you would have, as we talk about emotional pain, it's not just the professional. So you have our patients or your clients, they come also with their own trauma and emotional pain. But when you are the professional, that puts you in the position of authority to lead that relationship. So, and to manage it appropriately, it becomes more challenging for you to do that effectively if you are not able to manage your own emotions and your own trauma. So that's why it's imperative that we step ahead of this and help people manage their emotional pain, what is beneath the armor, because then in their work life, they are bound to encounter challenging cases with people who have their own emotional pain and emotional trauma, and you are supposed to be the adult in the room and lead
Yeah.
with authentic strength.
Well, it's a lot. Do you think that because there's the expectation on men, to be leaders and to have the weight of the world on their shoulders, especially, if when they're in a high, status position, whether it's a CEO or you're an attorney, you're a doctor, you're in an emergency room and everybody, has their eyes on you, or in the military, even any kind of corporate structure where you're the top. Do you think that all this weight being on your shoulders, if you don't measure up or if you judge yourself, to the standards that have been, given to you, do you think that that is what then spouts out of control, that then leads to these suicides that you were referring to earlier? Because I've seen the articles that talk about a high suicide rate in the legal industry as well, where lawyers take their lives, and people don't realize it, but there's a lot of personal internal stress that we go through that people don't see on the outside. But what do you think about the expectation that we have from society, being put on us, and then having that on our shoulders, not giving us a way out?
It breaks my heart every time I see a news article or something in the news where some high profile person has taken their life. And a lot of times you would hear this was a very good person, everything seemed fine. No
Yeah.
differently, you go to the other end of the spectrum, teenagers as well. You would hear the person that was a star athlete or the person that was leader of whatever in school, everything seems so fine, and then this tragedy happens. Again, I think that is our responsibility as a society. I cannot put that on that individual. I think we should also be very careful how we pump people up and what we expect from them, and to make sure that our expectations are reasonable. No differently than praising somebody for working so hard when they have not slept for 48 hours. You know you're leading them to their death. That's a high level of stress that is not sustainable.
Yeah.
So I think, and we also have to make that decision for ourselves because, yes, you have that job, but do you have to stay there if it is not healthy for you? Because health is something that we don't think about when we are not feeling pain, physical pain. So a lot of people would not go to the doctor. I've always been healthy. But what I tell people is by the time you feel the pain, by the time you feel that chest pain, you've had that heart disease for a long time. And the drivers of a lot of medical diseases, inflammatory diseases, is stress, one of the drivers. your stress hormones. And so it is important that we talk about this in the workplace. That's why, again, this book is from students all the way to corporate, especially corporate. And part of the corporate training is that for people to be aware, what is your drive, what is the goal, and where is your health in this equation? Where is your relationship in this equation? Is it balanced? And health and wellness is not just, taking in deep breaths, and it is about balance.
Yeah. Well, could we talk then a little bit about people don't have to do it all? Like you said before we started recording, even in your own professional career, you had made strategic choices about what you were going to do and not do, right?
Yes,
I think that connects with the whole inability to say no sometimes, right? That's a boundary that people have. Many people have that. I, somebody asks you, "Hey, can you do this?" You say yes, and you feel bad if you don't agree to say to give more of your time, but eventually there's nothing left of you to give, right?
exactly.
So you decided strategically, I'm not gonna do this or this or this. So talk to us about that and how people can make sure that they're making better life choices.
And I think that is, and it's because of knowledge and information. And I say, if I did not have this information, if I went through medical school and didn't do that elective psychosomatic disease
Hmm.
and started then making certain choices, and then when I moved over to this country, I was studying for my board exams, the USMLE Step 1, and I remember studying the psychiatry section, and I read there in that little review book that amongst professionals, medical doctors have the highest rate of suicide. And I made a decision then I was not going to be that statistic. And so I was very intentional as to where I applied for residency. Residency, it had to be a place where I felt that holistic approach to medicine and well-being. And even when I started residency, I had some tragic events happen in my life which changed the course of my life, where I had two siblings die in a car accident. And so I had to make different choices. So now I took on responsibilities, family responsibilities that just 3 months prior to starting residency I did not have. So that also meant that I had to adjust what I would put on my plate. So if I was nominated for a house staff position, I clearly remember when we were doing house staff elections and somebody had nominated me for a position. And I said, thankfully, no, because I knew I could not serve in that position and take on these other responsibilities and still be a resident and be whole and healthy. And so, yes, I made intentional decisions, intentional about even my life as a spouse. And you talked about doing all. And this one now, I will talk about to women because I think growing up, I don't know whoever said that, and I'm glad I never ascribed to that, that you can do it all. I have a modification to that. You can do it all at different times
Mm,
and different measure,
that's good.
but not do it all 100% at the same time.
Yeah.
That is a recipe for disaster. So I think we cannot, I think we have to reframe that. And so, yes, I was very intentional. Another thing that people have to pay attention, especially high professional people, if I have, because the reason people work a lot sometimes is money, finances,
Yeah.
lifestyle. If I can say anything that would help anybody anytime, live below your means. That's all I can say. If you live below your means, then you're always going to be able to afford your life without undue stress, to put in additional hours to maintain a lifestyle that you probably may not need at the
Yeah.
cost of your health.
Yeah. The idea of keeping up with with the Joneses, so to speak, that can literally kill you, right? Because it's
Yeah,
going to cause increased cortisol, that's going to cause increased stress, that's going to cause a heart attack eventually.
yeah, I've seen that. I come from a community where, like people from my home country, you have doctors, you have lawyers, you have nurses, you have this, but, a lot of us went to the same, maybe the same boarding school. But you see how, as you say, keeping up with the Joneses, we don't have Joneses, but I would say keeping up with your colleagues and your,
Yeah.
not colleagues, and maybe alumni mates. And so somebody might be a neurosurgeon making so much money, The primary care physician doesn't make as much as the neurosurgeon, and clearly the nursing assistant or the LPN doesn't make as much. But I see in the community everybody wants to do the same thing. We want to all go to the same vacation spots. We all want to have the same kind of house. And you don't realize one person only puts in 40 hours a week for their lifestyle, and the other person has to do three jobs.
Correct.
So somebody is paying a higher price for that life, and at the end, you ask, is it worth it? Is it worth it for your children to grow up without a parent present just because you're working three jobs to provide for them the latest gadget, to buy them the latest car? At the end of the day, what they need is some of you and less of the things that you're paying for.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is a good word of advice for parents themselves so that when they're raising their children, they don't start applying the societal standards of success at all costs on their kids. I'm from a family, all of the children, grew up and became professionals. Okay, lawyers, doctors, PhDs. We have it all. My parents are very proud of that. At the same time, there are a lot of hidden costs that people don't account for. And so that's really good word of advice. And so it's not just to lawyers, but also, when they're raising their own kids, making sure that they don't repeat the cycle and continue this because eventually the expectation is not going to go away on their own children. So, but let's start closing up. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and how people can get a hold of you.
So I am on LinkedIn, and I also have my website, which is www.atangamd.com, and which by the time people get to hear this, it will be fully running. We're just doing some work on it these days. And so there's LinkedIn, and there is Instagram as well. And I do put just some little pearls as far as conflict. I do provide coaching, especially for corporate, because again, like I say, men's groups, women's groups, and it's important. I actually have it in the book. So even though it says men, this is advice for everybody.
Yeah.
But it is important that the people in our lives, everybody should know about emotional pain, emotional suppression, and how to manage it, and how it generates or it leads to conflict, and how we can manage that and prevent it. Every time you can prevent conflict, every time you can mediate appropriately, it's better than trying to resolve a crisis, no matter the area. And as far as most of the work that I'm doing with corporate is with hospitals or healthcare organizations, just because,
Yeah.
that's where I've lived my entire life. But I have done other, just it's the same formula that I've done in other countries and other places, other corporations, wherever people have conflict, that is
Yeah. Well,
with
wherever people live together, there's going to be conflict,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's
and conflict is a good thing. It's not a
yeah,
bad thing. People should not be afraid of conflict.
yeah,
It is just bad when we don't know how to handle it and we let it degenerate into a crisis, because
yeah,
then everybody loses at that point.
exactly. Okay, Dr. Bernadette Atanga, thank you so much for coming on the show today, LMI podcast. And that's everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. So until next time, come back to the LMI podcast. We are on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and on the website, lmipodcast.com, where we talk about law and conflict resolution. All right, signing
Thank
out.
you very much. Thank you very much, Mark, for having me. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.